Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my friends. Welcome to NTI's Conversation series. I am Jue Wei, the head of program for Applied Buddhist Studies and Humanistic Buddhism, as well as the director of the Humanistic Buddhism Center. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to NTI's Conversation series. Today, we are very, very fortunate to be able to hold an interreligious dialogue on the topic of kindness and compassion. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which NTI resides, the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, as well as the elders past, present, and emerging. Today's topic on kindness and compassion. It's a really important one and relevant and timely for us here in Nantian Institute. For in the second semester, starting in just a month's time, we will be holding our own subject on interreligious understanding and Buddhism, conducted by our lecturer of Applied Buddhist Studies, Dr. Elizabeth McDougall. So we want to be able to start this interreligious dialogue. And I found a new friend, Professor Leo Lefebure, who has such deep and broad knowledge, and himself being a theologian, but also very well aware of the intricacies of the teachings of both Catholicism and Buddhism, to talk about values that we truly think about in terms of humanism, humanistic values. So a few words about Leo. Professor Leo Lefebure is Professor of Theology and the inaugural holder of the Matteo Ricci S.J. Chair at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He's the author of the award-winning Transforming Interreligious Religions, Catholic Responses to Religious Pluralism in the United States. His other award-winning books include Revelation, The Religions and Violence, True and Holy, Christian Scripture and Other Religions, and The Path of Wisdom, a Christian commentary on the Dhammapada, co-authored with Peter Feldmeier. So Professor Lefebure is the president of the American Theological Society, a former president of the Society for Buddhist-Christian Studies, a research fellow of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and the trustee emeritus of the Council for a Parliament of the World's Religions. I'm so honored to be sitting together with Leo today, and I welcome everyone now to Leo's exposition on how kindness and compassion can feature in interreligious dialogues. The Zoom floor and this hybrid floor is all yours, Leo.
Thank you. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of this area and its environs, and I acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. In the spirit of the indigenous peoples of North America, I dedicate my remarks to Mitakuya Oyasin, all my relatives. I can translate this loosely into Latin as Fratelli Tutti, all my sisters and brothers. This is the entire community of life on this planet, the rocks and rivers, mountains and valleys, sky and sea, all of whom were addressed by Francis of Assisi as our brothers and sisters. Kindness and compassion are among the most important virtues shared by Buddhists, Christians, and practitioners of many other religious paths. The Hebrew word chesed is usually translated as kindness or loving kindness, or sometimes as mercy. The root meaning of the word is loyalty. That is, the loyalty that exhibits itself in actions rather than words or sentiments. In the Greek translation of the Jewish Bible, this word was translated into Greek as eleos, compassion or mercy. So the virtue is exemplified by God's covenantal loyalty and faithfulness, which then is a model for humans. Another Hebrew word, racham, is often translated as compassion, including a disposition to forgive someone, to offer aid, assistance, or help to someone in need. It's connected to concepts of grace, goodness, love, loving kindness, compassion, and patience. Racham is etymologically related to the Hebrew word for womb, rechem. And so the image is womb love, the type of love that a mother has for the child of her womb. And this is made explicit by the prophet Isaiah, who presents God as saying, "Can a woman forget her nursing child or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you." Loving kindness and compassion shape the New Testament's presentation of Jesus, who repeatedly encounters persons in suffering and responds with healing mercy. Loving kindness and compassion inform Paul's description of agape, selfless love, in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, with the famous lines, "Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." At the meeting of the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1993, Brother David Steindl-Rast acknowledged that the word God often can be problematic in interreligious conversations. He looked for a principle that emerged from the center of Christian life that could engage the center of every other religious tradition without entering into the debates over the word God. And then he read the 13th chapter of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, the description of agape, loving kindness in action. Now, these teachings resonate deeply with the wisdom of Shakyamuni Buddha, as expressed in the teachings concerning metta, often translated as loving kindness, and karuna, often translated as compassion. So even though the cosmological and anthropological assumptions of Buddhists and Christians are very different, the virtues that we cherish often converge very powerfully. And I've been very moved by reading about your efforts here at Nantien in the volume Cultivating Compassion, Going Beyond Crises. So I'd like to share some reflections on various dialogues And most recently, I was part of the 8th International Buddhist-Christian Colloquium in Phnom Penh about a month ago, and I'll close with some remarks on that gathering. So let's go back. 1972, Pope Paul VI met with the most venerable Somdech Pra Wanart, the 17th Supreme Buddhist Patriarch of Thailand, at the Vatican. And they had a very warm conversation. Pope Paul said to his Buddhist guests, quote, "We have a profound regard for your spiritual, moral, and socio-cultural treasures that have been bestowed on you through your precious traditions. We recognize the values of which you are the custodians, and we share the desire that they should be preserved and fostered. We hope there will be increasing friendly dialogue and close collaboration between the traditions you represent and the Catholic Church." After this, Pope Paul asked Cardinal Pignedoli, the leader of the Vatican Office for Relations with Other Religious Traditions, to contact the leader of the Benedictine order, Rembert Weekland, and encourage Catholic monks and nuns to take the initiative in forming friendly relations with monastics in other religious traditions. This led to the formation of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue, a group of Catholic monastics in the United States and Canada who reach out to monastics in other traditions. In Europe, the counterpart is known by the French name Dialogue Interreligieux Monastique. I was an advisor to them in the late 1990s and early 2000s. In 1968, the American Trappist monk Thomas Merton visited His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in India, and the two quickly became friends. 25 years later, the Dalai Lama visited Merton's monastery, Gethsemane Abbey, near Louisville, Kentucky, in the United States, and expressed the desire to have a monastic dialogue there. And so I was part of the gathering in the summer of 1996. We planned the discussions around themes of monastic life in both Buddhist and Catholic traditions, but we had the Dalai Lama and Mahaghosananda, who, without saying very much, represented the sufferings of the Tibetan and Cambodian people. And we also had Armand Veilleux, the #2 leader of the Trappist Catholic monastic community worldwide, who had just returned from Algeria, where he had retrieved the remains of the French Trappist monks who had recently been killed in the conflict between some Muslims and the Algerian government. So in and through the discussions of monastic life, we were constantly talking about the challenge of violence and what is the loving and compassionate thing to do for both Buddhists and Catholics. As part of these discussions, Armand Veilleux told the narrative of how the French Trappists knew after a certain point their lives were threatened. And they went through a monastic discernment. Is it better to stay and risk being killed, or to leave and go home to safety in France? And at first, they took a vote. 2 people wanted to stay, the rest wanted to leave, but they're Trappist monks. They did not want to do this by majority rule, and they did not want to debate. So they stayed in silence and prayed. And the next time they voted, it was unanimous to stay. And eventually, most of them were killed. A couple survived. At that point, one of the representatives of Tibetan Buddhism posed the question from a Buddhist perspective. I quote, "How did their staying express compassion for the aggressors who, from a Buddhist point of view, will reap the karma for lifetimes of murdering them?" I guess my question is whether the aggressor is genuinely benefited by the martyrdom or the sacrifice. And I find it very disturbing and troubling from a Buddhist point of view because compassion seems to be missing. Also present was Dom Bernardo Oliveira. He was the leader of the Trappist monastic community worldwide. And he commented, I quote, "When I received the news about the killing of the 7 monks of Atlas, the very first idea that moved in my heart was this: I forgive. I give all my pardon to the assassins. And I was absolutely sure that was the intention of Christian, Christopher, Luke, and all the brethren. When I received the testament of Christian in the full text, I saw that he says explicitly that he forgives the man who is going to take his life. So that is the point. I do not think that the killer is going to hell, not at all. I am almost sure that I am going to meet him at the right hand of the Lord. Now, we did not know this at the time, but later they published the letter final testament of Dom Christian, the prior of this monastic community, to his brother in France that was to be opened in the event of his death. And it addresses various persons he wanted to communicate with. And it closes with a final word to his potential killer, saying, I fully expect that we shall meet as two happy thieves in paradise. After this, the Venerable Chung Pang Cham, who was president of the Buddhist Council of the Midwest and co-president of the American Buddhist Congress, commented, I quote, I am very happy to hear from our brother about forgiving the murderer. Forgiveness is the whole issue that we have to keep in mind. It is very hard for the people to forgive something. This Buddhist monastic leader then went on to cite the example of King Ashoka, who had killed many people early in his life and then became, quote, a king of Dharma and spread out the Dharma all over the Indian continent. So that is loving kindness in action. In the darkness of society today, we also apply loving kindness and compassion from our hearts for everybody. The past has gone. Whatever happened is gone. So we try to clear our mind of things that limit our compassion today, end quote. So from various angles, we were constantly reflecting on how to bring loving kindness and compassion as responses to violence in our world. Also present was Mahagosananda. He was one of the great examples of compassion known to all of us for his work for peace during the tragic fighting in Cambodia during the 1970s. He organized peace marches through active battlefields and in minefields. And there was a very dramatic exchange. There was a Japanese Zen leader, Eishin Nishimura, present. He had visited one of the refugee camps just over the border in Thailand, where refugees from Cambodia had come carrying nothing but the clothes on their back. And so it was a very, very difficult situation. They had nothing, and there was nothing to do in the camp. But in the corner of the camp was a simple makeshift hut that served as a place for Buddhist meditation. Inside the hut was Mahagosananda. So in our monastic encounter, Eishin Nishimura turned to Mahagosananda and exclaimed, I quote, it was desolate. People stood, then people sat. They had nothing to do. Then I saw a small Buddhist temple, a hut really. In the middle of the dirt floor sat a lone monk in meditation. That monk, I now realize, was you, Mahagosananda. My question for you is a Zen question. What did you do there where there was nothing to do? Without a pause, Mahagosananda replied, quote, I was seeking peace in myself so I would have something to bring to others, end quote. This reply is one of the best examples of responding to violence and desolation with loving kindness and compassion. So Mahagosananda was embodying the practice of compassion. When he found himself in an impossible situation where there was nothing to do, he thought of how he could help others by bringing them peace. Now, the Westerners present kept trying to get Mahagosananda to coach them on practical tactics for nonviolent protests. They wanted to learn, how do we do this? But he would just respond with these one-line aphorisms, classic Buddhist wisdom statements. Finally, someone had the inspired idea of asking him to lead us in walking meditation to the grave of Thomas Merton, the friend of the Dalai Lama. So we walked silently out of the chapter room where we were meeting, past the graves of other monks behind the chapel to the cross marking the grave of Thomas Merton. Mahagosananda stood behind the cross, and the rest of us formed a semicircle around him. It was a very moving communion beyond words. Now, the Catholic monastics kept referring to the rule, meaning the monastic rule of Saint Benedict, which structures their lives. So Buddhists have their own rules for monastic life, and they ask to see the rule. After this, a number of the Buddhist monastics based in the United States decided to write a Buddhist response to the rule of Saint Benedict. And so a few years later, Norman Zoketsu Fisher, Joseph Goldstein, Judith Simmer Brown, E. Fa, and others published Benedict's Dharma. Buddhists reflect on the rule of Saint Benedict. And Judith Simmer Brown responded to the command in the rule of Benedict to care for visitors, guests, the elderly, and the sick as Christ himself. So she commented, "How can this be understood in Buddhist terms? When we look into the face of a sick person, we are taken out of ourselves and our self-confirming habits. We are aroused to compassion and service. Similarly, when we encounter the guest, one we would normally consider an outsider, stranger, even a foreigner, we are exposed to a world beyond our making. If we can meet that world fully, hospitably, with openness and respect, we also are meeting Christ," end quote. So that's a Buddhist practitioner taking in this Benedictine rule as an internal challenge. 6 years later, we met again in Gethsemane Abbey, and this time we organized the discussion directly around the themes of forms of suffering and Buddhist and Catholic ways of responding with kindness and compassion. On the opening evening, Bhante Gunaratana, one of the leaders of Theravada Buddhists in the United States, spoke of the tremendous value of friendship for Buddhists. And he reframed the virtue of loving kindness. I quote, "Real generosity means letting go of this attachment to self. This letting go of self is also called selflessness. Understanding our attachment to self is not easy. So to cultivate this generosity, this selflessness, we also practice what is called loving kindness, or what I prefer to call loving friendliness. The word for loving kindness is metta, which is derived from the word for friend, mitta. Loving friendliness is to be directed toward ourselves and toward others." The later discussion, I pointed out that friendship is a central value for Catholics as well. In the 12th century, a Catholic monastic leader, Aelred of Rievaulx, wrote that Christ is the third between two friends. And he stated in Latin, Deus amicitia est, God is friendship. One of the greatest blessings for me in Buddhist-Christian dialogue has been the wonderful people I have met along the way and the friendly relationships I have developed with them. At the conclusion of the second Gethsemane encounter, Norman Zoketsu Fisher, abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center, and I were asked to describe what had happened during this week. And we both agreed that the most significant development was the forming of a new community of friends and companions across religious lines. A new form of sangha, a new form of what is called in the New Testament koinonia, communion. None of us were trying to deny or minimize the important differences between our traditions, but we encountered common values and concerns that drew us together. And Norman's experience is a good example of how interreligious encounters can change us. During the first Gethsemane encounter, we sat with the Trappist monks in the choir stalls for evening prayer, and they sing the entire collection of the Psalms, some of which pray for deadly violence upon one's foes. Now, Norman was raised in a Jewish family where they prayed the Psalms in Hebrew. In the dialogue, he asked us Catholics what it means for us to pray these violent, bloody Psalms. A number of us spoke, but of course, none of us fully answered his question. And the question inspired in Norman, as an adult practitioner of Buddhism, to explore his own Jewish heritage. So he went back to studying Hebrew. He found a rabbi in the San Francisco area who would guide him. And he's also a published poet. And so just before the second Gethsemane encounter, he published a book, Opening to You, Zen-inspired translations of the Psalms. He selected many of the Psalms and did a free poetic rendering them into English in light of his Zen sensibility. They're not really literal translations, but they're free interpretations in light of his adult experience of Zen Buddhism. And one evening, he invited me to join him, and we drove into Louisville together to a bookstore where his publisher had arranged for him to do a book presentation event. Now, fast forward to 2015. I was part of a dialogue in Italy that involved people from 5 urban areas in the United States. So these were Buddhists and Catholics involved in dialogue in the Los Angeles area, San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, and Washington, D.C., where I live. It was organized by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in collaboration with the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue and Buddhists from across the United States. Our topic was to discuss the sources and forms of suffering in the United States today and how Buddhists and Catholics can respond with compassion. Los Angeles was an early place for Buddhist-Catholic dialogue, and it's a good example of how if we have loving kindness and compassion, misunderstanding is not an obstacle. So someone would take minutes at their meetings, and then they'd begin the following meeting by going through the minutes. Usually, whoever took the minutes would get it wrong, because they would hear the other side and try to write down what they understood, but often they wouldn't understand. But because the discussion was enveloped by loving kindness and compassion, this was not a problem. People didn't get angry. The misunderstanding could provide the topic for the next meeting as they tried to probe more deeply. During the beginning of his pontificate, Pope Francis reached out to all people with a special concern for collaborating with those who follow a different religious tradition in order to show kindness and compassion for the poor, for migrants, for the earth, and the entire community of life on the earth. And he hoped that believers can be more effective in addressing these issues when they bond with other religious traditions. And so he proposed a model for interreligious dialogue, Befriends and Help the World, that focuses on building interreligious relationships together with concrete social outreach to relieve suffering. In 2014, Father, now Monsignor Indanil Koditawaku, the then Undersecretary, now Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, suggested to my colleague and friend, Professor Donald Mitchell of Purdue University, that we should start a new round of Buddhist-Catholic dialogues around the concerns of Pope Francis. And that's what led to our meeting. So Pope Francis wanted this not to be simply an academic discussion, but a building of relationships that would affect the world with compassion. Donald Mitchell is a member of the Focolare movement. This was founded by young Italian Catholic women after World War II, a time of devastating suffering, when their founder, Chiara Lubich, had a series of mystical experiences. And she, from the beginning, had a strong sense of the importance of interreligious friendship. And she would say very clearly, Jesus taught us to love our neighbor as ourselves. If our neighbor practices a different religious tradition, we have to love our neighbor in and through their distinct religious tradition. So our topic was suffering, liberation, and fraternity. And Pope Francis had addressed fraternity as an essential human quality, for we are all relational beings. A lively awareness of our relatedness helps us to look upon each person as a true sister or brother. Without fraternity, it is impossible to build a just society and a solid and lasting peace. Jean-Louis Cardinal Taurin from France was the president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, and he issued a message to Buddhists throughout the world for the Feast of Vesak in 2014, inviting Buddhists and Catholics to cooperation with other pilgrims and people of goodwill to respect and defend our shared humanity. And so he urged, drawing upon our different religious convictions, we are called especially to be outspoken in denouncing all these social ills which damage fraternity, to be healers who enable others to grow in selfless generosity, and to be reconcilers who break down the walls of division and foster genuine brotherhood between individuals and groups in society. There were many different Buddhist groups represented here, including Fokwan Chang and Shilai Temple, as well as Dharma Drum Mountain, Higashi Hunganji, a whole series of different Buddhist communities. Cardinal Taurin opened the dialogue by commenting, in a world where diversity is seen as a threat, our coming together today in friendship and peace is a sign of our openness towards one another and our commitment to human fraternity. He explained, we are all pilgrims, and I see this Buddhist Catholic dialogue as part of our ongoing quest to grasp the mystery of our lives and the ultimate truth. And he presented 3 stages in this process. First, carry less baggage. Quote, overcoming prejudices, wounds, fears, in order to listen to one's heart and to that of one's religious neighbor. Second stage, crossing borders. Journeying to know the other side while remaining firmly rooted in our own beliefs. This process, he said, can thus turn ignorance into understanding, a stranger into a friend, hostility to hospitality, and divergence to convergence. Final stage, returning home, transformed by what we experienced. So this set the tone. So we talked for most of a week about the different causes of relational suffering that people endure. I did an essay on early Christians who, like the Buddha, knew that life as normally lived in this world is profoundly unsatisfactory, marked by the suffering that comes from impermanence, sin, and death. The Buddhist tradition warns of the 3 poisons of craving, ignorance, anger. These are very similar to what Thomas Aquinas described as the roots of sin in the wounds of human nature. And often the language of early Christian writers comes very close to the language of Buddhists. So in some ways we're very different, but again and again we come close. So Justin Martyr, who wrote during the 2nd century of the Common Era, viewed sin as rooted in erroneous belief and ignorance of what is good. Early Christians were in a society of dramatic inequality, and they were aware of suffering caused by poverty, greed, the abuse of wealth. Sickness was a constant threat. Devastating plagues brought widespread suffering and taught everybody the transience of human life. Christianity was not recognized as a legitimate religion until the early 4th century, and so Christians faced the chronic danger of persecution from Roman authorities. So they always faced the challenge of how to respond to violence. Buddhist tradition often names craving as the root cause of our unnecessary suffering. The letter of James in the New Testament traces the origin of conflicts and disputes to cravings out of control, and it sharply chastises those who acquire and hoard material riches unjustly at the expense of laborers and the poor. So the letter of James says, those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and you do not have it, so you commit murder. You covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. And so in these areas, there's often a convergence between Buddhist analyses of what gets us into trouble and Christian analyses. Buddhist participants shared about how their tradition views our sense of identity as warped by a false sense of permanence and possession. We think we exist as permanent realities, and we look to things outside of us to give us security and power. And Buddhists warn us this is an illusion that leads to suffering. I noted in the ancient Hellenistic world, the wealth was often acquired and preserved through unscrupulous means. And so early Christian fathers like Gregory of Nazianzus believed private property arose only as a result of the fall of the first humans, and he viewed almsgiving as a crucial process of becoming like God. Gregory's friend Basil of Caesarea was scathing in his challenge to the wealthy who thought they were harming no one by holding on to their possessions. And then another of the early church leaders, John Chrysostom, critiqued the whole sense of possession. And again, this comes very close to certain aspects of the Buddhist tradition. He wrote, "Observe that concerning things that are common, there's no contention, but all is peaceable. But when one attempts to possess anything by himself to make it his own, then contention is introduced as if nature herself were indignant, that when God brings us together in every way, we are eager to divide and separate ourselves by appropriating things and by using those cold words, mine and thine. Then there is contention and uneasiness. But where this is not, no strife or contention is bred." And so here again, there's a convergence. Early Christian leaders were very forthright on the importance of caring for those who were suffering, both in the Buddhist or in the Christian community and beyond. Buddhist monastics traditionally were places that cared for the sick. I remember visiting a Buddhist temple in Bangkok that had bas-reliefs, carvings of images of Buddhist monks caring for the sick. Buddhists value non-discriminating concern and compassion for others. And this was also one of the virtues of the early Christian community from an early date. So there's many different points at which we come together. On Wednesday, June 24th, so yesterday was the 10th anniversary of this, we traveled to the Vatican for a personal audience with Pope Francis. And for many of us, including Buddhists, talked about how this was a major highlight of their lives. And Pope Francis entered the room radiating a positive energy. He had specifically chosen to be with us, a Buddhist Catholic dialogue group, rather than with a Christian ecumenical group or other groups that were visiting the Vatican that morning. And Cardinal Turan presented us to the Pope by explaining, quote, "We have been engaged in discussing how to collaborate together in a world of divisions." And Pope Francis responded, "It's a visit of fraternity, of dialogue and of friendship. And this is good. This is healthy. And in these moments, which are wounded by war and hatred, these small gestures are seeds of peace and fraternity. I thank you for this, and may God bless you. Then Pope Francis personally went around, starting with the Buddhists, going around to each of them and received numerous gifts, including a Buddhist prayer shawl and a Buddhist blessing. And his face was just beaming. You could tell how much he appreciated the interaction with the Buddhists. The following day, we talked about liberation from suffering between persons and the broader context of all living beings. Donald Mitchell offered a very thoughtful reflection on the meaning of creation in light of an Italian Catholic theologian, Piero Coda, who had studied Buddhist thought intensively. Coda was very much aware in the Buddhist tradition, negative terms are frequently used with a positive meaning. We have to let go of illusion in order to see reality as it is, so the path to true understanding leads through negation. Catholics have our own via negativa, negative way, that leads through negation to fuller life in God. And Coda proposed an innovative understanding of the relationships of love in the Holy Trinity as nulla, nothingness. And again, this is inspired by dialogue with Buddhists. Donald Mitchell explained this dynamic of the nothingness of love as the essence of God involves a mutual interrelatedness, a mutual interpenetration, a mutual indwelling. All three of these words are categories about the true nature of the cosmos presented in Hui Yen Buddhism. For Christians, these categories reflect the dynamic of divine kenotic emptying love that is the source of the event of creation. So Don Mitchell followed the lead of Piero Coda in reinterpreting creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, to mean creatio ex nihilo amoris. Creation arises from the nothingness of love. So this is an example of Buddhist language transforming Catholic self-understanding. Hosan Allen Senauka from the Berkeley Zen Center began his reflection on nature and climate crisis by quoting the Canticle of the Sun of St. Francis of Assisi, which inspired Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. Laudato Si means praised be you. And it's inviting all creation, brother, sun, sister, moon, entities that humans don't normally think of as alive. All creatures praise God. Senauka related the Buddhist precept not to take what is not given to the environment. Driving automobiles, flying on airplanes, global production and consumerism, the industrial growth society involves theft. Violating the precept of not stealing is an expression of structural violence. Pope Francis calls for integral ecology. Allen replied, quote, integral ecology is not Christian or Buddhist, but truly human. We are responsible to and for the world we live in. After the dialogue in Italy was over, Senauka posted an online response to the presentations of Catholic social teaching in our dialogue. I quote, in recent decades, we've seen the development of socially engaged Buddhism. But it seems to me we are still lacking a rigorous Buddhist equivalent to the social gospel. We need a social dharma to care for our common home. This social dharma must reach across our different cultures and Buddhist traditions. And many other persons there responded. I mean, there were speakers from humanistic Buddhism, including Fokwan Shan's Shilai Temple. There were Wan Buddhists, Risho Kosakai Buddhists. The Venerable Miao Shi, Executive Director of Buddha's Light Publications USA, proposed, On the subject of fraternity, a Buddhist synonym is harmony. Harmony within our own mind, harmony between self and other, harmony within the family, harmony in society, harmony or peace in the world. And the Reverend Koichi Sugino of Rishoku Sakai, he approached the topic of fraternity in light of the positive transformation that frequently occurs in interreligious projects. And working in Religions for Peace, he's constantly involved in reaching out to others. And he found the results of interreligious dialogue. Number one, a positive change in the image of the other. Two, a greater increase in the willingness to cooperate with the other. Three, falling more in love with your own religion. Four, a new way of seeing the other through the eyes of that deepened love. So we issued a little statement at the end that included issues like addressing global climate change on the local level, creating outreach programs for youth in the cities, collaborating in prison and jail ministries and restorative justice matters, and a long list of other things. So that is one of the major dialogues that I've been involved in. The Vatican, for the last 30 years, has been organizing international colloquia in dialogue with Buddhists. And the very first one of these was held at Fopangchang in Taiwan in 1995. We had the 8th International Buddhist-Christian Colloquium in Phnom Penh about a month ago. And our host on the Catholic side in Cambodia, Bishop Olivier, the Apostolic Vicar of Phnom Penh, sent us a welcome in which he cited Pope Francis's invitation to open new perspectives for encounter in order to promote, quote, the culture of dialogue as a path, common collaboration as a way of life, and mutual understanding as a method and criterion. And he also recalled how St. John Paul II, of venerable memory, was a friend of the venerable patriarch of Phnom Penh, Samdech Tep Vong, who passed away a year ago. And so he also noted Pope Leo has opened his pontificate by reaching out to people in all religious traditions. So at the end of our dialogue on May 30th, just about a month ago, we issued a final statement, and I won't read the entire thing, but I'll just cite a few lines. We, the Buddhist and Christian participants gathered in Phnom Penh, a land profoundly shaped by the compassionate witness of His Holiness Mahaghosananda, to reflect on our sacred texts, spiritual teachings, and lived experiences as sources of healing and hope for a world fractured by violence, injustice, and exploitation. Over these days, we prayed. We visited one another's places of worship, studied and dialogued in a spirit of mutual respect and friendship. Our conversations were marked by deep listening and the discovery of shared wisdom. Both traditions call for the transformation of hearts and societies through compassion and truth. Then they quote the Dhammapada. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal law. Drawing from the Buddhist tradition, we are inspired by the practices of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, and mindful detachment, paths that cultivate inner peace and foster harmony within society. The life and witness of countless Buddhist practitioners, especially His Holiness Mahaghosananda, revered as the Gandhi of Cambodia, remind us that even the most painful wounds of history can be transformed through compassion, wisdom, and spiritual resilience. And then they cite the saying of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." And they note that in the gospel, there's a call to forgiveness and reconciliation. The statement affirms Reconciliation is not the erasure of memory, but a courageous process of truth-telling, healing, and the restoration of relationships. Resilience is nurtured by inner strength, rooted in faith, and sustained by communities that uphold the dignity of every person. Building peace requires addressing the deeper causes of conflict: poverty, environmental degradation, social injustice, and the denial of human rights. Our respective religious traditions offer profound ethical and spiritual resources to face today's challenges with compassion, courage, and hope. And they stress the value of education in forming new generations in the values of nonviolence, dialogue, and interreligious cooperation. The statement continues, as we return to our homes and regions, we carry with us a renewed commitment to walk together as friends and spiritual companions, a deepened appreciation for one another's traditions and wisdom, a shared resolve to be instruments of peace, healing, and hope in a wounded world. They conclude, we pledge to bring the insights and commitments born of these days to life through ongoing dialogue and concrete collaboration in our respective communities and regions. So this is an appeal from Catholic and Buddhist leaders to all of us to work together to shape a better world. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Leo. I know I'll get it wrong anyway, like what you've said, right? We're trying to do anything we think we know, we'll definitely get it wrong. But if there's one message that I get out of what you have presented to us, it's hope. I think there's a lot of hope for humanity in the face of all the challenges that we are facing, because these challenges give us the opportunity to exercise loving kindness and compassion and this friendliness. I know that here at Nantian Institute in my classes, we usually end the day with a checkout gatha that begins with may kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity pervade all worlds. And what you've done is so good. So I would like to open the floor now. We have about 8 minutes for questions. If anybody would like to raise a digital hand, maybe offer some comments or questions. Same here in the hybrid room. If you'd like to just raise your hands, that's perfectly fine. Or just unmute and speak up.
Venerable. Hi.
Oh, that's Cecil from the Philippines.
Hi, good morning, Professor Leo. Thank you very much for such vast exploration of the commonalities of shared values and wisdom between Christians and Buddhism. I'm Catholic, but I have embraced many Buddhist practices and thoughts that help me appreciate better my own tradition. So maybe I'm what you call a Catholic Buddhist. Now, my question is, first, the premise that in fact, yes, we have established a lot of commonalities, and even in the highest sense of what the Buddhist calls emptiness, that via negativa, even by St. John of the Cross, that is so parallel, except that Christians call it nothingness, and Buddhism calls it emptiness, because there's some technical difference in their lens between nothingness and emptiness. And the same thing, the great parallel in the stages of prayer between Buddhaghosa and Teresa of Avila, and also in the recitation of the Heart Sutra on emptiness that is very common in all Buddhist rites. We have the resonance of Saint Therese of Lisieux. So these three are all Carmelites, great Carmelite saints who have gone through the mystical level of religion or of spirituality. And my main question, therefore, is, we have all the commonalities, but how do we reach a level of cultivation that would bring about that higher qualities of being, of wisdom, of compassion, of loving kindness? Because in my experience, of Buddhist thought and practice, I found right view and right understanding of the world, of impermanence, of suffering, of selflessness, very, very important in establishing the parameters by which we can align thought, speech, and action towards cultivation of the higher qualities of being. Now, in Catholicism, in Christianity, sure, everything about goodness is there, but we are left to our own resource to develop ourselves. And it is not so widely practiced. Who would know about Teresa of Lisieux or John of the Cross to understand emptiness? But in Buddhism, I think that they have reached a level of cultivation, of practice that brings down all these very high qualities of concepts to the level of everyday life. And that's what we're looking for in the Christian religion. And to me, having been taught by all these precepts and all higher thoughts, philosophy about life, I would like to be able to share this with my fellow Christians, my fellow Catholics, so that we can have a better appreciation of our own religion, because there are so many gaps. Like, for example, Catholics cannot explain equality. Why is there equality? We don't see any equality because we don't have the sense of karmic law. And I think the level of moral awareness and moral responsibility that go with ethical living is something that needs to be emphasized. Because as you see, Professor Liu, we can say that, the Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they are rooted in the same tradition. But if we review, they are the most violent of all religions because they were killing in the name of love, in the name of God, and they belong to the same God. So these are the things that come to mind, and that's why I'm very, very interested in interreligious studies, in interreligious understanding, because I think that we can open ourselves up to traditions that might help us deepen our own belief in love of neighbor, because there are many things and resources available that we can use from all these dialogues. That's my thought. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your reflections. I agree that the Carmelite tradition offers very rich resources for engaging in dialogue with Buddhists, and there are often very strong similarities of language, like in the negations of St. John of the Cross. In the United States, a number of Carmelites have engaged in Vipassana and Metta practice coming from Theravada Buddhism. So people like Kevin Culligan, Daniel Chowning, Mary Jo Meadow wrote a book together on purifying the heart, where they propose a Catholic acceptance of Theravada Buddhist style meditation. And they talk about the purification of the heart in St. John of the Cross and the purification of the heart that can take place through practice of the Theravada style of meditation. And then Mary Jo Meadow wrote a book as a sequel to that, Gentling the Heart, which looks at the practice of metta, where Buddhists send out the Brahma-viharas, the virtues of the dwelling places of the Buddha, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, to everyone, starting with oneself, and then to those to whom one feels close, and then to those people to whom one's indifferent, and then the real challenge to those people we can't stand. And this, to me, is a way of accepting the challenge of Jesus to love our enemies. So what does that mean, to be in a loving relationship to someone that we're engaged in a conflictual relationship with? And so I find very helpful the practice of metta meditation, where I don't have to be able to will directly a feeling of loving kindness, but I can will to be able to will loving kindness towards a person who's in conflict with me. And so I agree that through the dialogue, each side can enrich the other. And I agree that the Catholic tradition can feel often a new sense of the vitality of our practice through communication with our Buddhist friends and neighbors. Thank you.
That's right,
Thank
right,
you.
right.
We're getting close to the end of the hour, but Nathan has raised his hand. So may I just invite Nathan to make a quick comment or question, and then we'll have a quick wrap up. Yes.
Yeah, just a
Nathan.
quick question. Thank you, Professor Lee. I really appreciate it. I'm partway through reading the Dalai Lama's book, Towards the True Kinship of Faiths. He recounts the story of Thomas Merton in that book, and I'm finding it really great. Do you recommend other reading specifically for interfaith dialogue? Other books?
Oh, there's a long, long list. Many years ago, I wrote a book, The Buddha and the Christ, which many people have found helpful, including one representative of humanistic Buddhism, Professor Shui Yu, who at that time was at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He had used my book as a textbook in his own courses. The Dalai Lama has a very interesting reflection on the Christian Gospels published. I think it's The Good Heart. It's a series of talks he gave outside of London at the Catholic monastery of Reverend Lawrence Freeman, a Benedictine monk.
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you so much to both Cecil and Nathan for your questions and your insights. And of course, we are so privileged to have you here, Leo. I think you've brought to us that relationality, that friendliness, the friendships that are needed for a better future. It's not more boundaries, but more bridges and the melting of the boundaries. Because another translation of the word shunyata, besides emptiness, is boundlessness. It's just boundless creativity. And it opens our heart. And so in that spirit, I'd like to welcome everyone to our next NTI conversation on July the 16th. Is another interreligious dialogue by Philip Bewley. And the topic is Beyond Othering, Buddhist and Christian Relational Perspectives in Dialogue. So I welcome everyone back at that time. And in the meantime, let's keep the dialogues going. Thank you all. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you all. All right, I'm going to end the meeting for all.